Hi everyone! Welcome back to another Planetarium live stream. I am Jessica, I am the Planetarium Director, and with me are two familiar faces. For anyone who's been to a live stream in the past, we've got two of my students here, and I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Eli, since he is to my left.
Hi, I'm Eli. I'm a physics undergraduate student at UMD.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
Yeah, so today we've got a super fun topic, one that I have been wanting to talk about, and I know that Lindsay and I both have been wanting to create a full-fledged planetarium show on this, and it's all about life out in the universe. But before we get to that, there are some updates we want to give you on the launch that was scrubbed on Wednesday. Before we get into that, though, real quick, if you do have any questions throughout the stream, please put them down in the comments. Eli will be watching that and will let us know if we have any questions that come in. And as always, we'll take some time at the end as well to cover any questions that maybe we didn't get to or any that come in at the last minute. So with that, let me switch over to my screen. And so as I said, to start off tonight, we want to give you a little update because Wednesday, our show was all about getting into space, which was coming up after the first attempt at the Crew Dragon launch up to the International Space Station. And unfortunately, that one was scrubbed at about 17 minutes before liftoff due to weather. Their second attempt was this afternoon, and it was successful. They did lift off at 2:22 p.m. So for anyone who didn't get a chance to see it, first up is
Falcon 9 is in startup. Dragon is in countdown.
A brief video
is armed for launch.
Of the launch, which was
Under
very
a minute
exciting.
Now, the FTS, the flight termination system, has been armed.
Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
SpaceX Dragon, we're go for launch. Let's light this candle.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Stage 1 tanks pressing for flight.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
And there it goes.
Crew Dragon, go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
America has launched.
One Alpha.
And so rises a new era of American spaceflight,
Stage 1
and with it
propulsion
the
is nominal.
ambitions of a new generation continuing the dream. 20 seconds into flight, stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
And I'm not gonna lie, at this point,
seconds into this historic mission,
once we had liftoff, I did start tearing up.
Falcon 9, and look at them go.
Falcon power telemetry nominal.
M1D throttle down.
We're throttling down to get ready for the period of maximum dynamic pressure. We're in the throttle bucket.
And we'll go ahead and stop this real quick there. Come on. Here we go. Okay, so that was the launch, successful today at 2:22. Everything was good to go. The Dragon, or the Crew Dragon capsule, is up in orbit around the Earth right now. One of the kind of trademarks that SpaceX has, I guess not invented, but has pioneered, is the retrieval of the first rocket stage. And so what you're seeing here is that Falcon 9 Falcon 9 rocket that safely landed on their drone ship that they have retrieved. So that is awesome. Here's a view of our two astronauts, Bob and Doug, as they're heading up, and we got a glimpse of a little stowaway there, our little sparkly dragon. This is what they call their zero-G indicator, which is just a fancy name to say it's a plush toy that's not strapped down, so that once it starts floating, they know that they are in microgravity and will start floating around the cabin themselves if they're not strapped down. I'm gonna head back to, well, no, we'll do that at the end, Lindsay. So yeah, that's been very exciting. Now, this is a test run of the first kind of crewed mission that SpaceX has launched, and they're going to be heading to the International Space Station. They will be docking in the morning at about 9:30 in the morning. NASA and SpaceX will both be live streaming that if you're interested in watching it. I'm still debating if I'm going to get up that early. But they will stay up there for a while before heading back down, and you can actually see the Dragon capsule yourself tonight. If it's clear, you can head outside around 10:15 and look towards the southwest. And there, kind of lower in the sky, you can see the bright light move past. That is the Dragon capsule. You're going to see basically it's sunlight reflecting off of it as it's moving overhead. So yeah, that's our update on that. Very exciting that they have successfully launched. Everything's looking good. The astronauts themselves are in their sleep time. They're going to get up again at about 1 a.m. and start getting ready for docking with the International Space Station, which again will happen about 9:30 in the morning. All right, so on to the main feature for today, which is all about aliens. And so when you hear the word alien, you tend to come up with a couple of views or images in your head that most people tend to think. One of the most common is, of course, the little green man. Another really common alien type is the kind of silver or grayish alien. Both of these tend to have kind of humanoid features, walking on two legs, have two arms, but they tend to have kind of a slightly larger head. For any horror movie fans, you may think of The Alien from the movie Alien. Great movie if you haven't seen it. But a lot of our fascination with aliens and life out there was ignited by some events that happened with our observations of the planet Mars. And so this starts back in the kind of late 1800s. There was an astronomer named Giovanni Schiaparelli, and he was making a map of what he saw on the surface of Mars. And of course, this was before we had cameras to attach to telescopes or do anything like that. And so he would literally look through a telescope with his eye for hours on end and sketch out what he saw. And in making this map, he saw these lines that crisscrossed across the surface of Mars. And he named these Canal, translates to channels, or just natural water features that are cut into the ground as water flows. Well, somewhere down the line, after this came out, there was what appears to be a translation error. When this was translated from Italian to Spanish, or from Italian to English, instead of translating canali as channels, it got translated as canals. And this may not seem like a big deal, but there is some important implications there, because a channel is a natural feature, where a canal is a man-made feature. And so this started this idea that there was life on Mars, some intelligent civilizations that had built these waterways crisscrossing across the surface, and the idea was that they were waterways to bring water from the polar regions down to the equator. And one of the main advocates of that was Percival Lowell, and you're seeing kind of a news clipping here. He was very famous for being extremely adamant that this was indication of an intelligent civilization, and he wrote lots of books, gave lots of talks, and it became pretty much common knowledge that there were aliens out there. They were on Mars, they were intelligent, and that of course started a lot of literary work working on that. One of the most famous was written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And he did this whole series about a man named John Carter, who was on Mars and his adventures dealing with the Martians. And he's actually, from what I read, the first to describe a Martian as a green humanoid or a green man. And so we think that might be where this little green man kind of stereotype for an alien got started. So all of this continued up through the early 1900s into the mid-1900s. And it's important to know that not all astronomers were on board with this. There were kind of groups who thought that this was what was happening. There are other groups who didn't think that thought there was another explanation. All of that got solved in 1965, though. And this is when Mariner 4 spacecraft flew past Mars and gave us our first up-close views. And they showed us this barren landscape that did not have canals or channels or anything of the sort crisscrossing across the surface. No evidence of intelligent life, no evidence of life at all that we could tell crisscrossing across or on the surface. And so it turns out that these lines that so many astronomers were adamant that they saw were actually an optical illusion. Our brain is really good at taking a bunch of random bits and connecting them or making them into something that makes sense. And because of the poor optics and the telescopes and things like that, it's believed that that's why they were thinking that there were these lines, that it was this optical illusion. That's it, sorry. All right, so moving on over. So that's where a lot of our fascination, it's believed, got started, and a lot of our kind of early depictions for what aliens may look like. And it's important to see similarities that we tend to see among depictions of aliens. A lot of them, almost all of them, tend to be humanoid, have 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, have very similar features to us. Or at the very least, they all appear to be a sophisticated, intelligent sort of life. But when we're looking for real aliens, real life that might be out there, it's important to know that it could come in a wide variety of shapes, sizes, colors, and intelligence levels. In fact, we're most likely to see simple life rather than advanced, intelligent life. And a lot of that we kind of understand based off of how life developed here on Earth. And there's still a lot of questions for us about how this happened. But as far as we can tell from fossil evidence, the earliest life, sorry, I'm watching like a million things on my screen as I'm managing the stream. Fossil evidence indicates that there was life on Earth as early as 3.5 billion years ago, which is not that far. The Earth itself is about 4, right, Lindsay? 4.6 billion years old? And so that's fairly soon.
Yep.
But it's possible that life could have developed even earlier than this. It could have developed as early as about 4 billion years ago. But all of this life that we see was very, very simple single-celled life. In fact, the very earliest life probably resembles what we see around deep volcanic vents today. And they probably were just the simple single-celled life that formed deep under the ocean near volcanic vents. It also did not depend on oxygen because there was no oxygen in Earth's initial atmosphere. This life was more than likely carbon dioxide based or used some other chemical reactions to get energy. So it looked very, very, very different to what life looks like today. Now, things started to change after, by about 2.7 billion years ago. And that's when we finally started to get oxygen in our atmosphere. That's when photosynthetic life developed. And so oxygen started to build up in our atmosphere, and there was actually a big extinction event because oxygen can be toxic to life that lives off of carbon dioxide or other things. And so a lot of things actually died off when oxygen became prevalent in our atmosphere. But that production of oxygen led to life being able to really grow and diversify in what we call the Cambrian explosion. And so it's important to see here that for the bulk of time that we think life has been on Earth, it has been this very simple single-celled life. The more complicated life didn't develop until much more recently, less than 1 billion years ago. And mammals and dinosaurs have only been around for the past couple 100 million years. And so when we're looking for life elsewhere, this is an important thing for us to know, that seems like the single-celled life can develop very early and can last for a long time. But the creation of intelligent life seems to take much longer and may be more complicated or maybe less likely to happen or harder to happen on a world. All right. So with that, looking at all of the forms of life that we see here on Earth, we try and come up with some requirements for what is needed for there to be life on the surface of a world. And when you look at all life very generally, it comes down to just a few requirements. One thing we see is that all life here on Earth needs liquid water in some way or form for some reason. So liquid water seems to be a very big need for life. And so we want to look for that. Well, we also need an atmosphere because that provides either the carbon dioxide or the oxygen that life needs to survive. And another thing that people may not think of is actually our magnetic field, because that protects us from a stream of particles that's constantly coming from the sun. If we didn't have that, that stream of particles known as the solar wind would actually strip our atmosphere away and leave us with no atmosphere. And so you need that magnetic field to protect the atmosphere and therefore allow life to possibly blossom on the surface of the world. So this is our criteria. This is what we're looking for. A place that has liquid water, has an atmosphere, and has a magnetic field to protect it. And so we've come up with some ways of trying to find that. And so if we're looking for a world that has liquid water, what we're really trying to do is find a world that is just right, that its distance from its star is just right for the temperatures to be where they're needed for water to be a liquid rather than ice or a gas. And so there is a region around a star that we call the habitable zone or the Goldilocks zone. And this is where those temperatures would be just right. And so we want to look for a world that is within this Goldilocks zone, because that tells us there could be liquid water, or at least the temperatures are right. We also want to look for a world that is big enough, the right size. Big enough that it can create an atmosphere, hold on to that atmosphere, and create a magnetic field to protect itself. And so when it comes to searching for planets that could have life or worlds that could have life, it turns out size does matter. We do want something that isn't too small and therefore is big enough to have these other things that we want. And so it turns out that there is actually a world right next door to us that doesn't look like it today, but could possibly have had life in the past, and that is our dear red neighbor, the planet Mars. You see, we have a lot of evidence that tells us in the past Mars looked very different than it does today. It had a much thicker atmosphere, it was much warmer, and was probably covered in an extensive amount of liquid water oceans. And so during that time, it's possible that life could have developed on Mars. Now, at this time, it's no longer meeting those conditions, and so life can't survive on the surface anymore. But one of the active goals on the missions that we send to Mars are to look for fossils of ancient life that may have formed in this early time when Mars was more Earth-like. Now, moving out from our own solar system, there are also a lot of planets around other stars that we have found that could have the conditions that life could develop there on the surface. And so what you're seeing here is a small sample of these. I believe the current estimate is at about 55. We've found 55 planets around other stars that meet the conditions for favorable for life to maybe develop there. At the time, we don't know if they have or not. We don't have sophisticated and advanced enough technology to be able to see them in the detail to figure this out, but it's something we're working on. But this at least gives us a good starting list of where to look for that life. One of my favorites, though, is actually the first one you see on the top left, Proxima Centauri, because that is around the star closest to us, about 4 light years away. And so it looks like that could be a good spot to look for life. And it's right next door, so we maybe could get to it someday. I don't know. That one's pretty close, which is really awesome. Now, all of these, and that we've talked about, is having life live on the surface of a world. But that's not the only thing that could happen. You could have subsurface life, life that lives maybe underneath ground or underneath the ocean. And so that expands our kind of search for where life could develop if we think about life that maybe can't survive on the surface, but could survive underground or under the ocean. And so in our solar system, one of the places that we are most interested in searching for life is actually a moon around Jupiter named Europa. Europa has a surface that's covered in a thick layer of ice, but underneath that ice sits an ocean of liquid water. In fact, it is estimated that there is so much water in this ocean that Europa actually has twice the amount of liquid water as we have here on the entire Earth. That is a huge ocean, and that makes scientists very excited because, again, where you have a lot of liquid water and you're underneath the ice, so you're protected from things in space, you could develop life, and maybe even not just simple cell life. Maybe there are alien fish or alien dolphins. I guess not dolphins since they breathe air, so we'll say alien fish swimming around in Europa. And that's why NASA and the European Space Agency are working on future missions to actually go and land on Europa, either drill or melt their way through that surface layer of ice and then explore that ocean below and see what we can find. But Europa is not the only place that is on our list. Enceladus, which is a moon around Saturn, also has a liquid ocean water underneath its icy crust. And it's possible that Triton, which is the largest moon around Neptune, might have or have had in the past an ocean of liquid water underneath its surface. Now, what about something else? Everything that we have been, all of our basis for searching for life, has been focused on finding life that looks like what we have here on Earth. And just because that's the only life we know of, doesn't mean that that's possibly the only way life could develop. And so we have to keep our options open and understand that life that develops somewhere else may be completely different than anything that we thought of and may not resemble anything that we see on Earth at all. And so with that in mind, the moon Titan, which is a moon around Saturn, is a candidate for possible life that doesn't rely on liquid water. Titan does have liquid on its surface, but it's actually liquid methane. And so we're not ruling out the possibility that maybe some form of life could develop that depends on liquid methane instead of liquid water. Who knows? We like to just keep our options open. And so for the very last bit of this, I want to end on one of my favorite little creatures, which is the only animal that we know of that can survive the vacuum of space, and leads to the question of, could there be microbial life frozen into asteroids or comets coming from somewhere else? So what you're seeing here is a tardigrade, also known as a water bear. These things are very resilient to a lot of different conditions. They're what we call extremophiles. They can survive at very, very hot temperatures, very, very cold temperatures. They can survive without water for, I believe it was like 10 years. They basically dehydrate and go into this really deep hibernation state. And then once they're able to rehydrate, they're like right back alive. And they can survive that dehydrated state for like 10 years. And as it turns out, they can survive the vacuum of space. We have sent some tardigrades up to space, put them out in space in the vacuum, also dealing with the intense kind of light coming from the sun and all of that, and then brought them back down to Earth and saw what was up, and a lot of them actually survived. So it leads to another question of, maybe there's microbial life on an asteroid somewhere that's just waiting to touch down and rehydrate or come out of its hibernated state. So yeah, that's a little bit on aliens and our search for it. You'll notice there's a lot of we don't knows, or a lot of we're just basing this off of what we see here on Earth, because that's our only evidence, or only, not evidence, what's the word? Guys, I'm having trouble with words tonight. That's the only place we know where life is. So that's like our one data point. So that's what we have to go off of. But as you can see, there are a lot of different places that we can look, a lot of different things to keep in mind as far as what life could look like. Could it be like ours? Could it be completely different? Could it survive space? But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. And I will go on record as saying that, yes, I do believe that there are aliens out there. We have hundreds of thousands of planets in our galaxy and trillions of galaxies in the universe. Statistics just seems to point to, yeah, it seems very, very likely that they're out there. Now, whether they come to Earth or not, I don't know about that. But I don't think we're alone. So yeah, with that, Eli, Lindsay, do we have anything you want to add or anything coming through?
I can't see anything that came through, but I did have to exit and then rejoin because I think my internet went a little wonky for a second. So
Okay.
if anything was before that, I can't see it, I don't believe. But no, as far as I can tell, there's not anything in there.
Alrighty. Well, if you do have any questions, put them down in the comments, and we can get to those in the next few minutes. I will actually turn it to Lindsay because you found a fantastic little discovery today.
All right. Well, you may have noticed that the astronauts had a little friend with them, as Jessica said, this sparkly dinosaur, which I was lucky enough to go out and find at the store. Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
cute.
And so Lindsay has acquired a couple of those, and stay tuned to our Facebook next week for a potential chance to win one of these for yourself. You can have the same sort of little dinosaur dragon that went up with the astronauts, which is exciting. And also, I love the sequin where it switches. Yes, I love it. I'm very excited. So yeah, stay tuned next week, and we'll tell you about that. Let's see. Other things coming up next week. On Wednesday, we're going to have a special guest, has been confirmed. Astro Bob, or Bob King, who is a local amateur astronomer here in Duluth, is going to be joining us for our stargazing tonight. He's going to tell us what's up in the June sky and give us some updates on some astronomy news. And then on Saturday, we are going to take you on an adventure through the entire universe, or at least as much of it as we can cover in about 30 minutes. So that's going to be a lot of fun as well. Anything else come through, Eli?
Nope, nothing else.
No? All right.
Or nothing new, rather.
Well, thank you all for joining us. As usual, if you want to rewatch any shows or watch one that you missed, you can find all of our streams on our YouTube channel. And have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we will see you next week. So, bye.